So we would be looking at the different components. But before that, just a little introduction about me. I have been associated with the education industry for the past 7 years, and teaching and mentoring has been a wonderful experience for me because I have been teaching a variety of age groups. I've been interacting with them for so long. Standardized testing has been a great experience so far because I really enjoy to see these passionate students who are discovering their skills, interpretive skills, their critical thinking skills, and are trying to make their mark when it comes to their career and are getting themselves prepared for the bigger challenges in life. So today's agenda, we would be discussing, as this is the first session, and for the next 3 days we are together, we would be discussing the different components that are there in the verbal section. So let's take a look at what's the agenda for today. All right. So today's agenda is that we would be having a brief comparison of the verbal structure of the Gmat and GRE test. As you all know that the Gmat and GRE tests are being conducted all over the world, and because of the COVID situation, because of the unprecedented times, you can also appear for these two tests from the comfort of your home. So this is a very convenient option for those who would like to have test center-like conditions from the comfort of their home, and also they could apply for a specific date, even 24 hours before they could apply for registration, and they could easily give the test from home. So this is an ideal situation, and also you could prepare yourselves in the meanwhile, and you could decide when would you actually like to appear for the test. So then we are going to be looking at the instructions. Now, the instructions for the test, obviously, you know that it's very important that we look at what exactly can we expect on the day of the test. We should be aware of the directions that are given to us on the test, so no surprises, basically. Then we are going to be looking at the effective tips to ace the reading comprehension section. Now, this is the most interesting section of today's lesson because obviously, you know, these tips are going to come in handy when you're going to be attempting your questions. You would realize how important it is to practice with the help of some very effective strategies that come from experienced candidates who really did well on their Gmat GRE tests. And then finally, we would be looking at the practice questions. Of course, it's going to be very exciting to have responses from you guys also. Towards the end, we'll be having the question and answer session as well. All right, so let's look at the next thing we have. Gmat and GRE verbal structure. So as you can see, there is a comparison of the number of verbal sections. We have one section for the Gmat and two or maybe three for the GRE section. That is if you're unlucky. I would like to explain this a little bit. When we talk about two or maybe three, if you're unlucky, number of verbal sections for the GRE, actually what happens is that, you know, when a student appears for a GRE test, usually they are attempting the sections and they have math and of course their English sections. So they might come across one of the experimental section also. But usually they are not aware of which one of them is the experimental session. Because, you know, when you're attempting your GRE test, you will come across 5 sections or maybe 4. If you have an extra section, that means that is the experimental section, which is usually ungraded. However, you are not aware of which section is that. It's just, you know, information that is not given to the students. So when you're attempting your test, you might not know which one of them is going to be ungraded. So sometimes it does leave students to a disadvantage because of the time lag, and, you know, it builds up more pressure on the student to attempt their test quicker and attempt the questions, you know, in a short period of time, because obviously it's rigidly timed, so you have to manage it accordingly. However, sometimes it puts you to an advantage also. That is because when you look at the GRE section, sometimes you do not know which section is it that you're going to do good at. And sometimes you're not able to perform well at each and every section. So that experimental section sometimes saves you from a lot of trouble when you might not be able to attempt one of the sections in a very good manner. And sometimes that might be the ungraded section. So this is sometimes, a situation where you put yourself to an advantage and a disadvantage. So I would not really say that you become unlucky when you have that extra experimental section. But keep in mind, you would never know which one of them was in experimental section and if it's ungraded or not, because that information is not given to the students. Moving on, number of verbal questions. You have 36 questions in the Gmat section. In the Gmat section, you have 36 questions, whereas in GRE, you have 20 in each section. So these are all MCQ-based questions. You have options. You have to choose the best answer. Time limit. You have 65 minutes for the Gmat section. You know what is Gmat, right? We are just going to have a brief introduction about the two of them, which one of them is a better option for what sort of candidates when it comes to choosing their career paths, their subjects. We will be discussing that shortly as well. GRE, 30 minutes per section, which means that if you have two sections, you have an hour to attempt both of them, because there is the time allotted is 30 minutes to each section. Main topics tested. Reading comprehension, which is common to both Gmat and GRE, and which is, by the way, the agenda for our today's lesson as well. Then you have critical reasoning and in Gmat, and then you have sentence correction in Gmat. Sentence correction, where you're mostly tested on your grammatical skills, and you have to make changes sometimes to the sentences that are given, to the questions that are given. Now for the GRE section, you have reading comprehension, similar to the Gmat test. And then you have the text completion section. Once again, you are tested on your grammar, your vocabulary over here. And then finally, you have sentence equivalence. So this is a brief overview of the verbal structure of both Gmat and GRE tests, and you can see that both of them have some sort of similarities, but both of them are different in their own ways as well. And let's find out how. Okay, before I read these instructions, I would just like to give you a brief overview. Students who are going for their MBA program or who want to pursue a business-related career in their future, so they could go for the Gmat test, of course. And usually the Gmat test, it's usually confined to the students who want to pursue business as their career path in the future. However, GRE is, broader in the aspect that even the engineering students could, appear for the GRE test, because that is going to prove to be beneficial for them when they're actually going to start off their degree program, the graduate program. So GRE is open to a lot of options, and whereas Gmat is confined mostly to the students who are going to choose business as their future subject or their future career path. So that's the basic difference. Other than that, when we look at the sections, when we look at the questions, Gmat is mostly based on logical questioning, whereas GRE is usually based on, you have geometry questions in GRE as well. And, so students who are better at logical answering, they might go for Gmat, and who are more interested in business-related career path, they could go for Gmat. So Gmat is basically graduate management admission test, whereas GRE is graduate record examination. So that's a little comparison in terms of what kind of content is there. And also in GRE, you have to focus more on vocabulary also, which is why some students are, they choose Gmat as their option, because sometimes they feel they might not be able to do well when it comes to revising vocabulary or when it comes to acing the text completion section in the GRE. However, that's not the case. The more you practice the questions, the more you are able to open up your knowledge about the different kinds of words, and you're able to prepare yourselves for vocabulary tests that are expected in the GRE text completion section. However, yes, if we compare the two of them, you have to rigorously prepare for your vocabulary test when it comes to the GRE section. All right, so Gmat, let's look at the directions that are there. The questions in this group are based on the content of a passage. After reading the passage, choose the best answer to each question. answer all the questions following the passage on the basis of what is stated or implied in the passage. So, as we have just read the directions, this is just to give you a clearer picture of what the directions are like, and when you're going to be giving your test in actual, you would be having no surprises on the test date. So it's very important that you pay attention to the directions, and you also absorb them right now, because on the day of the test you would realize that this is how you have to attempt the questions, and it won't really put you in a situation where you're unfamiliar with what exactly could you expect from the given section. So let's look at the GRE reading comprehension instructions. Select and indicate the best answer from among the 5 answer choices. So in both the instructions given for both of the tests, you can see that there are MCQ based questions. And that is the reason why we say that you could, prepare yourselves for the MCQ based questions, and you would come across a variety of them. So prepare accordingly. And we are going to be looking at a variety of questions today. So be prepared, because we would be looking at the content, the statements of the questions, to make sure that we understand all of them, right? And we are actually prepared for those kind of MCQ questions that are completely you can say new for us. However, having an idea about them is going to help us. Moving on. 7 tips to ace the reading comprehension section. As already mentioned, the reading comprehension section is all about, of course, you will have a passage and you would be looking at some questions. They will be from the passage based on implicit and explicit information that is given in the passage. But the challenge over here is that you have to develop your critical thinking skills, your interpretative skills, and you have to answer accordingly. There might be questions based on main ideas, supporting ideas, inferences, and application of logical structure and style. So you will have to act on accordingly. Interpret material, draw inferences, or apply to a further context. So these could be the challenges, right? So let's look at the next slide. All right. So we have the next slide over here, and we will be looking at the very first tip that we have. Yes. So the very first tip that we have is tip number 1. Leave general questions for the end. Now, general questions sounds like something that's based on the overall theme or the message given in the passage, right? So I'll just read out a question to you regarding the general questions so that you have an idea what kind of a question is a general question, right? So let's look at that. I'm going to read out this question statement to you. According to the passage, which of the following is true of a Malthusian explosion on population? According to the passage, just pay attention to this particular statement right in the beginning of the question. According to the passage. So this is just like an overall message that is given in the passage, something that's based on the overall theme of the passage. So this means that you have to base your observation in response to the overall message that is given in the passage, and you have to decide which of these options is the correct answer, the closest possible answer when we talk about Malthusian explosion on population. So this is how you differentiate between general questions and a variety of other types of questions. General questions are not from a particular paragraph. They're not from a particular line of the passage. They are not from the introductory part of the passage. They're not from the conclusion of the passage. You have to have information about the entire passage to answer the general question, which is why we say leave general questions for the end. It's very obvious to understand that if we leave general questions for the end, by that time, we would have sufficient knowledge and understanding about the passage, because by that time, we would have attempted a variety of questions about the about the passage, and we would have clear understanding as to how we can attempt the questions. So it's a very good idea that we leave general questions for the end. And you're always in safe hands when you realize that you have an idea about the variety of questions, and you have an understanding, a solid understanding about the passage, because sometimes the information given in the passage might not be very clear to you. So general questions, their answers might come to you, might be very clear to you towards the end. So leave general questions for the end, I would say. All right. So this was tip 1, and realizing its importance when we are going to practice the questions, we'll come back to it to practice it as well. Tip number 2, laser pointer. Okay, sorry. So this is treat title questions as main idea questions. The primary purpose of the passage is to criticize explanations of human behavior that are based solely on observations taken from the animal world. B, show why the expected population explosion following the Industrial Revolution did not occur before the Industrial Revolution. C, demonstrate how family size was influenced by both environmental restraints and social attitudes before and after the Industrial Revolution. D, present 2 alternative theories that explain why family size tends to shrink with increased prosperity. E, argue that studies based on social attitudes are more effective than models based on evolutionary advantages in accounting for demographic patterns. Now, obviously, we have not read out the passage, so we might not be able to tell what's the right answer as of now. However, I just wanted you guys to have a clearer idea of what title questions are like. If you read the statement of the question, the primary purpose of the passage is to. Once again, this question is based on the overall information presented in the passage, on the overall theme, message, idea of the passage. So you cannot really say that, this is a line specific or a paragraph specific question. It is sort of a main idea question that you're looking for from the passage. Let's look at some more statements about the main idea primary purpose questions. Okay, so we have some very nice statements that would make it very clear for you guys to understand how the main idea primary purpose questions look like. And one more thing, that when you're going to read these statements, you would also be able to differentiate them from a variety of other questions that we usually have in the reading comprehension section. And another thing, guys, reading comprehension section is common to GMAT and GRE both. So these tips that we are discussing, like I said, they are for both the GMAT and GRE tests. So make note of these no matter which test you are going to appear for, because they are going to come in handy on the day of the test, whether it's GMAT or GRE. Let's look at the main idea primary purpose questions tips. The statement, sorry. Which of the following most accurately states the main idea of the passage? Okay, once again, it's a main idea question. It's very clearly stated that most accurately states the main idea of the passage. Next, which of the following best states the central idea of the passage? The most important idea in the passage, the central idea, the theme of the passage. What's the author emphasizing on mostly throughout the passage? Then the next statement. I hope you can see my laser pointing is moving between these statements, so you can go through them one by one. The passage is chiefly concerned with. So this is another word. Look at the keywords. Chiefly concerned with. What is the passage mostly about? How does the author emphasizes on this one particular issue that is given in the options? Which one of them is the closest to the passage that is being read by you guys earlier? Then the next one, the main concern of the passage is to. It's similar to the one that we just read. Okay, the main topic of the passage is in the passage the author is primarily interested in. This is something that I really like about a main idea question, the author's interest. When you read a passage, guys, you immediately have an idea towards the end that, okay, the author was more of the view that this is how something should be, and this is how something should be this is how something should be followed. So when we look at these kind of questions, we have a very quick idea as to what the answer could be. So here you can actually predict an answer to. The primary purpose of the passage as a whole is to. So this is also another primary purpose question or a main idea question, because it is talking about the overall message, the message that is the crux of the passage. So this is how you can see that these are the variety of main idea questions that we have. Moving on, the next tip. Tip 3. For target questions, follow the 3-line rule. The 3-line rule, what exactly is it? Let's read out the question first, and then I'm going to help you understand what the 3-line rule is. The author mentions the decrease in the importance of physical labor, line 28, in order to. This is a line-specific question. The line is mentioned, it's line 28, and the author is talking about a phenomenon, a decrease in the importance of physical labor, and what exactly is he emphasizing on. This is what we need to look at in this question. So this is a line-specific question, and when we are talking about a target question, line-specific question, we usually tend to look for information from within that part of the passage. And that is when we usually do not read just that particular line. We read the preceding lines, we read the lines after this particular line, the target line. So we have to follow the 3-line rule, because we can read 2 to 3 lines preceding the actual text from where we have to get the information, and we can read the lines that come later. So this is the 3-line rule. Read 3 lines before the actual line and read 3 lines after the actual line, so that the meaning becomes more vivid, clearer, and lucid to you by the end of reading that particular part of the passage. So it's very important that you remember this tip, because sometimes you tend to read because you're running short of time, you're in a panic situation, so you just want to read that particular line, but that's not the case. In order to get a correct answer, it's very important to understand the meaning of the word that is in context, or the meaning of that particular line that is in context. For that, you need to understand the information that is given around that line too, to make sure that you're getting the right answer. Sometimes the options are very confusing and you cannot decide which one of them is the best answer. So please make sure you remember the 3-line rule. Next, tip number 4, look out for adjectives to answer tone attitude questions. Now, tone attitude questions. I'm sure you must have heard about author's tone, author's attitude in the passage that was given. So what exactly is a tone attitude question? Let's look at that. In the 3rd paragraph, the author criticizes those who believe that. Look at the word criticizes. Look at how it's written right next to the author, the word the author, because obviously the author's tone. What exactly is the author not liking about a perspective? What is the author criticizing? What is the author against? So basically, this is the kind of question that we would say is a tone attitude question. The author would definitely disagree with something. He would definitely make it a point to make his readers believe in something. So those kind of statements where he is emphasizing on something to make the information believable, credible, that is where the author is expressing his tone, his attitude towards a particular phenomenon, perspective, perception. So in that case, you have to look at the tone attitude questions and look for specific adjectives, specific describing words. Let's look at the options to understand what exactly is when we talk about tone attitude questions, what exactly is it when we have to look out for adjectives. So let's read the options for this question as well. Option A, the similarities between Homo sapiens and other species are more significant than their differences. Look at the word significant. This is an adjective, and this is something that's giving you a hint about this kind of perspective. B. The differences between Homo sapiens and other animals are those of degree, not kind. Once again, it's a descriptive question, so stick to the keywords. C. Homo sapiens and animals belong to separate and distinct divisions of the living world. Then D. Homo sapiens and animals have the ability to control their environment. E. Homo sapiens and other organisms can be arranged in Aristotelian nested groups. Keywords, descriptive words, stick to that context. Usually they give us the biggest hint when it comes to tone-based or attitude-based questions. And you're not looking for anybody else's tone. You're only going to focus on the author's attitude, his perspective about something, his idea when it comes to critique of something, when he is ridiculing an idea. So that is what you have to look at. Tip number 5. When in doubt, use process of elimination. Process of elimination, which is just shown with a POE. Remember it. When does this come in handy, the process of elimination? This is when you do not have the idea about the answer at all. You're absolutely confused among all the options and you do not know how to get the correct answer. So the best way to go about such a question is to use process of elimination. What exactly is process of elimination? I'm sure many of you who have given tests in the past and have been doing MCQ based tests, they would know about this, that you can cross out the answers that are not likely to be the correct answers first, and then when you're left with 2 or 3 options which seem to be the correct answer or close to the correct answer, you could perhaps narrow down the answers that are that have the chance of being the correct answers. So out of the 2 or 3 options that you're left, you can narrow down 2 more, and now out of those 2 you can then decide which one of them is the correct answer. So things become easier like that, and which is why we recommend that you use process of elimination when you're in doubt, when you're absolutely lost, when you do not have the slightest idea what exactly is the question all about, where is it coming from within the passage. So please stick to this tip. All right. So this is tip 5. Make note of this. Next tip. Tip 6. Predict an answer before going through the options. This is also very important, that you predict an answer before going through the options, and sometimes it happens as, it comes as a natural ability that is there when you're attempting a test. Sometimes you instantly know the answer in your mind and it flashes in your mind, and you know, okay, so this option is the closest possible answer because I also thought of it when I read the question. So let's look at the question that I have given as an example. Based on the context of the passage, the author's use of the word empirical most nearly means which of the following? Verifiable by experimentation, true, subjective, nonsensical, typical. So these are the 5 options. Now you have already read the passage and maybe you have tried to make a meaning out of the word empirical, but your meaning might be a different word, but that word might match one of these options. So when you have read the question statement and the answer flashes in your mind, try to match it with one of the options, and that is definitely going to be the answer that is correct. So this is why we say that prediction of an answer before going through the options is a very good idea. It really helps when you know when you have information about the passage from a particular part of the passage and you're very confident about it. So that is when this tip could be applied, that you could make a prediction in advance before reading the options. So this was tip number 6. Let's look at the next tip. Tip number 7. Annotate as you read the passage. Okay, now I'm sure most of you would be familiar with the word annotate. What exactly are annotations? These are little summaries, key points that you make by the side of the paragraphs as you read them within a passage. You make pointers in the corner, you highlight the text. So this is annotation. And I'm sure most of us are fond of doing this. Not just when it comes to a test. Whenever we are expressing ourselves through writing. And when we are reading anything in general, a newspaper, a blog, anything, we tend to make summaries of something that we like, something that we are particularly interested in. So this is when you do annotations, and this is extremely helpful because you highlight the important parts of the text. You try to make meaning out of the passage so that you could remember the general ideas, the basic point of view of the author. So this is a very helpful practice, and I would really appreciate if you guys make it a practice to annotate the passages when you're going to practice them for your Gmat, GRE reading comprehension passages. So please make sure that when you're practicing your reading comprehension section, you make it a practice, make a note of this tip that you annotate as you read the passage. It won't waste a lot of time. I could definitely guarantee that. In fact, it's going to save you from a lot of trouble when you're actually going to look for answers. A key idea in the corner of a paragraph would save you from reading the entire paragraph when you're going to look at the answers and when you're going to look at the questions from that particular paragraph. So try to make it a practice, and I'm sure it's going to be really helpful. Okay, so there's a sample question which I would like to read. The last paragraph performs which of the following functions in the passage? Now, guys, this question is from the last paragraph. Like I said, making a note of an idea from the paragraph, just highlighting an important line or the central idea, the main idea of that paragraph, it could actually save your time when you're actually going to answer this question, because you would have an understanding, okay, this was the idea about the last paragraph. So try to do this, because it's going to prove extremely helpful when you're going to actually practice this. Now we are going to look at the next part of the lesson. As we have read out the 7 tips, I would just want to sum it all up that we have read so far. Leave general questions for the end. This was our first tip. We have already discussed the general questions. Number 2, treat title questions as main idea questions. Yes, it's very important that you treat title questions as main idea questions, because when you're going to read the title questions, you will have an understanding, because we also looked at example questions of the title questions. They usually tend to focus more on the overall message of the passage. Number 3, for target questions, follow the 3-line rule. Number 4, look out for adjectives to answer tone attitude questions. Number 5, process of elimination when in doubt. Number 6, predict an answer before going through the options. Number 7, annotate as you read the passage. I'm sure by now you all have taken down these tips, and you are definitely going to apply them when we are going to practice this comprehension passage that's coming up. And we are going to use these tips. We are going to apply the process of elimination, the 3-line rule, and looking out for adjectives and predicting answers. And of course, if you would like, you can also annotate. You can make notes while I read the passage. And you'll also look for the general questions to answer them towards the end. So let's look at the reading comprehension example that we have. This passage actually seemed very interesting to me. The questions might be challenging, because obviously nothing comes easy when it comes to the verbal section. There are challenges, there are some easy questions. But of course, when you have read the passage really well, I'm sure you would realize what's the main idea, what's the central idea of the passage. So let's go through it. Let's make our summaries and highlight the key points as we read it together. The following passage is from a discussion of various ways that living creatures have been classified over the years. Now, this is just a general idea about the passage. You could say this is pretext, giving you some background information about the passage, that it's going to be about living beings and how they have been classified. So let's read out the passage to find out more. The world can be classified in different ways, depending on one's interests and principles of classification. The classifications, also known as taxonomies, in turn determine which comparisons seem natural or unnatural, which literal or analogical. For example, it has been common to classify living creatures into three distinct groups: plants, animals, and humans. According to this classification, human beings are not a special kind of animal, nor animals a special kind of plant. So they are telling us about this taxonomy. Taxonomy is a general idea. It's basically a branch of science in which people tend to make ideas. They tend to generate ideas based on the classification of a variety of organisms. So this is basically that branch of science where you classify organisms. Okay, or you classify anything in general. All right. Thus, any comparisons between the three groups are strictly analogical, reasoning from inheritance in garden peas to inheritance in fruit flies, and from these two species to inheritance in human beings is sheer poetic metaphor. So far, it's clearly obvious that the author is trying to make it a point. He's talking about the classification of the plants, animals, and humans, and he's further going to explain how they are being classified, and then he's going to uh, point out what exactly does he believe in when it comes to the classification of plants, animals, and humans. So let's read out to find it out. Another mode of classifying living creatures is commonly attributed to Aristotle. Instead of treating plants, animals, and humans as distinct groups, they are nested. All living creatures possess a vegetative soul that enables them to grow and metabolize. Of these, some also have a sensory soul that enables them to sense their environments and move. One species also has a rational soul that is capable of true understanding. So, we will talk about this. Let's read it. Thus, human beings are a special sort of animal, and animals are a special sort of plant. So we are talking about capabilities over here of the different souls of the plants, of the animals, of the human beings, and how they could be classified according to their characteristics. Given this classification, reasoning from human beings to all other species with respect to the attributes of the vegetative soul is legitimate. Reasoning from human beings to other animals with respect to the attributes of the sensory soul is also legitimate. But reasoning from the rational characteristics of the human species to any other species is merely analogical. According to both classifications, the human species is unique. In the first, it has a kingdom all to itself. In the second, it stands at the pinnacle of the taxonomic hierarchy. All right. So I'm sure you would be able to understand what exactly is the author talking about. The language that he has used is slightly scientific because obviously you could have passages from a variety of subject areas. You could have it from science, biological science, from humanities, from literature, from history. So this is something that is more towards the biological science beliefs and perceptions. Okay, so let's read the rest of the passage now. Homo sapiens is unique. All species are. But this sort of uniqueness is not enough for many, probably most people, philosophers included. For some reason, it is very important that the species to which we belong be uniquely unique. It is of utmost importance that the human species be insulated from all other species with respect to how we explain certain qualities. Human beings clearly are capable of developing and learning languages. For some reason, it is very important that the waggle dance performed by bees not count as a genuine language. I have never been able to understand why. I happen to think that the waggle dance differs from human languages to such a degree that little is gained by terming them both languages. But even if language is so defined that the waggle dance slips in, bees still remain bees. It is equally important to some that no other species use tools. No matter how ingenious other species get in the manipulation of objects in their environment, It is absolutely essential that nothing they do count as tool use. I, however, fail to see what difference it makes whether any of these devices, such as probes and anvils, etc., are really tools. Now, look at the tone of the author over here. Notice the attitude that he has developed. He's trying to make it clear what does he believe in. So, this is, coming towards the end of the passage. All the species involved remain distinct biological species no matter what decisions are made. Similar observations hold for rationality and anything a computer might do. Once again, this is, you can say, sarcasm in a way that he's trying to compare rationality and logic with a computer. So he is just giving you a reference of a computer to tell how agitated he is when he sees the comparison that is made among the three kinds of species. So yeah, so that's the passage. And now we are going to go to the questions. Before we begin the questions, I would want you guys to have an idea about the passage. This passage was talking about the different perceptions that philosopher like Aristotle has, people who generally classify animals and plants and humans. They have some observations about them, and further we are going to we are going to dive into the questions now to understand more about the passage. Sometimes when we are answering questions, we understand the passage in a better way rather than just merely reading it. We tend to understand the passage in a better way when we are actually looking for answers from within it. So let's look at our first question. Question number 1. Please read the statement very carefully. Try to categorize this question, keeping in mind the types of questions that we have earlier discussed. According to the author, what is most responsible for influencing our perception of a comparison between species? So, what is the author's point of view? What does he think? What is most responsible for influencing our perception of a comparison between species? So, let's look at the answer. But this is, we can say, it is a tone or attitude based question. So, let's recall that tip. Try to answer this question. Look for adjectives, of course, and also this seems like a general question or a main idea question also, because it tends to focus on what the author's perspective is. So let's look at the options. Option A, the behavior of the organisms in their natural environment. B, the organizational scheme imposed on the living world by researchers and philosophers. C, the style of language used by scientists in presenting their research. D, the sophistication of the communication between organisms. And E, the magnitude of hierarchical distance between a species and Homo sapiens. Okay, so we have got some options, and here I would want to apply the process of elimination to understand, because this is not a target question. It's not from a specific part of the passage. It is based on the overall message given in the passage or the overall idea that's presented in the passage. So let's just rule out the options that we think are not the possible answers. Okay, so I would like to point out option A, the behavior of the organisms in their natural environment. We have not come across any evidence or any information that talks about the behavior of organisms in their natural environment. We have not talked about those instincts throughout the passage. There was no information about how organisms, they behave with each other, they interact with each other or with the natural environment. So there's no such evidence for this option. So this is the first wrong option that we have. Cross it out. Then B, the organizational scheme imposed on the living world by researchers and philosophers. Okay, so organizational scheme, how do we tend to organize them? How do we classify them according to the beliefs of the researchers and philosophers? Now, this tends to make sense because if we recall, we read about the Homo sapiens idea, we read about the philosophers' perceptions. So this means that this could be one of the possible answers, which is why I'm not going to cross it out. Then C, The style of language used by scientists in presenting their research. Not really. We have not come across any information that talks about what kind of language do scientists use when it comes to presenting their research about different species. So this is definitely not one of the right answers. So cross it out as well. Option D, the sophistication of the communication between organisms. Nope, we have not talked about any communication between organisms and how exactly do they interact. We've not talked about plants, animals, and humans interacting with each other in an ecosystem, in an environment. So this cannot be the possible answer. There's no evidence of this information. E, the magnitude of hierarchical distance between a species and Homo sapiens. We have mentioned the phenomenon about Homo sapiens. We have talked about that, how humans have evolved from the old times. However, we have not talked about how they tend to be different from other species, and we have just quoted this to make a comparison, but this is not to highlight the hierarchical distance between species and the Homo sapiens. We will just look at the correct option that we have chosen earlier, and that was option B. And that everyone, I'm sure you can highlight that option B is the correct answer. We have ruled out the options that did not seem to be the right answers. We have read the passage, and I'm sure you must have realized none of the options other than option B seem to match the information given in the passage. So this was not a difficult question at all, according to me. I'm sure everyone has their perspective, but for me, this question was easier in comparison to the rest of the questions. And we made use of the tips and strategies. We focused on the keywords, we ruled out the wrong options, and we got our answer. Let's look at the next question. Question number 2. Which of the following is not possible within an Aristotelian classification scheme? Now, for this, we might have to go back to the passage to read the idea about Aristotle's belief as to how he classified the species. Let's read out the options first, and then we'll go back to the passage. A, two species that are alike in having sensory souls but differ in that one lacks a rational soul. B, two species that are alike in having vegetative souls but differ in that only one has a sensory soul. C, a species having a vegetative soul while lacking sensory and rational souls. D, a species having vegetative and rational souls while lacking a sensory soul. And last, we have E, a species having vegetative and sensory souls while lacking a rational soul. Now, I would like to go back, like everyone would do. I would also want to go back to the particular portion of the passage where Aristotle was mentioned. So let's read that portion where his perception was discussed. So this is where Aristotle's perception was discussed. Let's read it. Another mode of classifying living creatures is commonly attributed to Aristotle, the way he made his taxonomy, right? So instead of treating plants, animals, and humans as distinct groups, they are nested. They are all connected in a way, like they form the bottom layer, the middle layer, and the top layer. Just like there's a set of tables and they tend to fix into each other. Similarly, this is the process of these these species that are nested together. All living creatures possess a vegetative soul that enables them to grow and metabolize. So all three of them, plants, animals, humans, they have a vegetative soul, which tends to eat, which tends to grow, which tends to, reproduce. So yes, that is one thing. Of these, some also have a sensory soul that enables them to sense their environments and move. Now, a sensory soul. The sensory soul is present in animals and human beings because they usually tend to have the sensory soul that helps them move, that helps them sense around their environment. Okay, one species also has a rational soul that is capable of true understanding. Now, this species is definitely the humans because obviously they tend to have a rational soul that can develop an understanding. They have a brain to think, to communicate, to have perceptions, to have a thinking. So this is why we say that they have a sensory soul. So how does this sequence go? The vegetative soul, which is common to all three of them, then the sensory soul, which is common to just the two of them, animals and humans, and then the rational soul, which makes the top layer of the humans, and that is the only soul where humans, they stand at the top, they make the top layer. So that is how they are nested, right? They are connected, yet they belong to different categories. All right, so we have read this, and if you want to read further, it's totally up to you. However, I would like to go back to the question now, and now let's read the options once again. A, two species that are alike in having sensory souls but differ in that one lacks a rational soul. Okay, we focus on the question. It says, which of the following is not possible? Now, option A is possible because they have talked about they are alike in having sensory souls but differ in one that lacks a rational soul. Yes, this one is there. When we compare animals and humans, one of them lacks a rational soul, but both of them have a sensory soul, as explained by Aristotle's taxonomy. Then B, two species that are alike in having vegetative souls, but differ in that only one has a sensory soul. Now here, once again, if we tend to compare plants with animals or plants with human beings, sensory soul is common to the humans and to the animals. However, vegetative is common to all three of them, which is why this tends to be true as well. This holds true according to the Aristotelian classification scheme. So this is not an option which is not possible according to Aristotle's taxonomy. Option C, a species having a vegetative soul while lacking sensory and rational souls. This is also true. It can clearly state that we're talking about plants over here, because only plants, they can grow, they have a vegetative soul, but they do not have a sensory or a rational soul. So this is also true. Not something that we could say is not in line with this scheme. D, a species having vegetative and rational souls while lacking a sensory soul. Okay, so once again, this species having vegetative and rational souls while lacking a sensory soul, this is the option that is not possible. So I can see that you guys are also coming up with answers, which gives me hope that all of you are having an idea and have understood the passage very clearly, because this was a confusing question, and especially considering the statement which asks us to focus on something that is not possible according to the passage's context. So a species having vegetative and rational souls while lacking a sensory soul. Now, this does not apply to any of the sequence that we have made, because vegetative and rational soul is only for the human beings. So it's not something that is common to two of them or all three of them. So D is the possible wrong answer. Now let's look at E, and then I'll confirm the correct answer. A species having vegetative and sensory souls while lacking a rational soul. Now, this is a comparison between humans and animals, but of course, this also holds true according to Aristotelian classification scheme. So the correct answer is option D. Very simple to understand when you go back to the passage and read the entire thing again. However, this question overall, I feel that it was slightly tricky to understand in general. Let's look at the next question. Number 3. Which of the following comparisons would be legitimate for all living organisms according to the Aristotelian scheme described in paragraph 2? Now, this is a paragraph-specific question. Once again, we go back to the same paragraph. We read out the portion where the word legitimate has been mentioned, but just let's first read the rest of the question and its options to understand what exactly do we need to look for. So, comparisons based on the vegetative soul. 2, comparisons based on the sensory soul. 3, comparisons based on the rational soul. So, okay, I'll just go back to the passage, and I'm going to read out where he has mentioned the word legitimate, And what exactly does he mean when he says that he believes in or he does not believe in this taxonomy? So he says, given this classification, reasoning from human beings to all other species with respect to the attributes of the vegetative soul is legitimate reasoning. From human beings to other animals with respect to the attributes of the sensory soul is also legitimate, but reasoning from the rational characteristics of the human species to any other species is merely analogical. According to both classifications, the human species is unique. In the first, it has a kingdom all to itself. In the second, it stands at the pinnacle of the taxonomic hierarchy. Okay, so he tends to say that part of this classification scheme is true. But when they refer to human beings as being superior to plants and animals, this is merely analogical. Okay, now let's go back to the options and let's look at what could be a possible answer. So the correct answer that we look for in this question is going to be, I'm sure most of you would have an answer in your minds. It's going to be option A, comparisons based on the vegetative soul. Why? Because all three of them have vegetative soul. Sensory soul, we cannot compare on the basis of sensory soul because it's just common to the human and the animal species. Rational soul, just for the human beings. According to this belief, plants and animals do not have a rational soul. So in that case, only option A seems to be the correct answer because comparisons could only be done based on the vegetative soul. So which of the following comparisons would be legitimate for all living organisms? According to the Aristotelian scheme described in paragraph 2, only the vegetative soul comparison is legitimate, as mentioned in that particular portion of the paragraph also. So this holds to be true, option A. And the rest of them would, of course, not be the possible answers. So this was question number 3. Question number 4. Now this seems like a target question. Let's read out why. If the author had wished to explain why most people feel the way they do, the explanation would have probably focused on the A, reality of distinct biological species. B, most recent advances in biological research. C, behavioral similarities between Homo sapiens and other species. D, role of language in the development of technology. E, lack of objectivity in the classification of Homo sapiens. I'm sure you all would be noticing that when I tend to look for an answer from the passage, I do not just particularly read that part of the passage or that particular line from where that keyword in the question statement is given. I usually tend to read, a bigger part of that particular portion of the passage because I want to make myself very sure about the answer that I'm going to choose. Which is why I prefer that I read the preceding lines and the lines that follow later, because I don't want to have a doubt when it comes to choosing my answer. So this once again takes us back to the tip that we discussed, the 3-line rule. And keeping in mind that this is a line-specific question, a target question, because it says line 40. So we need to stick to the tip and we need to go back to the passage, read the preceding lines, the lines that follow after the target line, and then choose our options accordingly. It's up to us how we want to rule out the wrong options, if we want to use the process of elimination, or if we want to choose the correct option directly. And I'm sure some of you might have already predicted the correct answer too. So let's go back to line 40 and read this out. Okay, so where exactly was the word most people? Homo sapiens is unique. All species are. But this sort of uniqueness is not enough for many, probably most people, philosophers included. For some reason, it is very important that the species to which we belong be uniquely unique. Okay. It is of utmost importance that the human species be insulated from all other species with respect to how we explain certain qualities. Now, this is the most impactful part for me from the rest of the passage, because I believe that the author has, he shows his frustration towards all of these classification, hierarchical classification taxonomies. He does not generally, tend to believe them, because he feels that we are giving superiority to the human beings in a very biased way. They are not superior to the plants and animals. Yes, they are when it comes to rationality, but that is something we could see these kind of characteristics in plants and animals in some way or the other. So he is showing his agitation. He is trying to ridicule the fact that humans, they want to be the most unique species out of them all, because they think that they are superior to everything around them, which is not the case for the author actually. So he is, trying to be very sarcastic over here in this particular part of the passage, and he is showing his we can say he's exaggerating the facts, and in the sense that he's trying to make it a point that this is not the case. So yes, let's go back to the question, as we have read the part that says that this uniqueness is not enough for many, probably most people, philosophers included. So let's go back to the question. Okay, options were, so what the author had wished to if the author had wished to explain why most people feel the way they do, the explanation would have probably focused on the what does the author want the people to believe in, how does he want the people to prove how the species could be compared, uh, reality of distinct biological species, most recent advances in biological research. There's no evidence for either one of them. Let's see. Option C, behavioral similarities between Homo sapiens and other species, role of language in the development of technology, lack of objectivity in the classification of Homo sapiens. Now, the right option for us is definitely not a reality of distinct biological species. There's no evidence of this throughout that part of the passage. He has not talked about what is the reality of distinct biological species. He has instead tried to explain that, the right answer. I can see some of you are also giving us the answers, but this option that has no evidence in that particular part of the passage. So he's not talking about the reality of distinct biological species. And then B, most recent advances in biological research. He's not talking about any recent research information or any advancements. He has shown no evidence of this kind of information in the passage. Then C, behavioral similarities between Homo sapiens and other species. No evidence of this either. I can clearly say that the author has not mentioned any behavioral similarities between humans and plants in that part of the passage. D, role of language in the development of technology. Well, he has focused on the word language when it comes to the waggle dance of the bees and the language, the communication with the help of the language among humans, but he has not made a connection of this particular thing with the development of technology. So this is definitely not the right answer. So we are left with option E, lack of objectivity in the classification of Homo sapiens. This is what he's trying to tell, that there is lack of objectivity in the classification of Homo sapiens. It's not supposed to make sense. This is something that that's just giving an edge to the human beings to become superior. So that is why the right answer is going to be option E. Now let's look at the next question, guys. This was a line specific, a target question. We went back to the passage, we read the preceding and the lines that followed, and we came up with the correct answer. If you're confused, you can still read the rest of the paragraph to have a clearer idea why option E is the right answer. Number 5, the author uses the words for some reason in lines 40 to 41 to express. I would quickly like to go back to the passage once again to explain why this could be the right answer, which one could be the right answer, sorry. So he says, but this sort of uniqueness is not enough for many, probably most people, philosophers included. For some reason, it is very important that the species to which we belong be uniquely unique. It is of utmost importance that the human species be insulated from all other species with respect to how we explain certain qualities. Look at the word insulated. Look at the word uniquely unique. So, for some reason, is used over here just to show his disappointment. just to show his disapproval, how he does not believe in the philosophy that holds. He is trying to disapprove of the fact that humans are superior. He thinks that this is not a fact, which obviously everyone has their own belief. So option B is going to be the right answer. We cannot say rage over here because that's a very strong word to express the author's tone. And C, despair. Once again, he's not being sad about something. D, sympathy, not applicable. E, uncertainty. No, he's very sure of the fact that humans are not the most superior species, and they just give credit to themselves for their rationality, but that's not the case because every species is different from another and superior to one another in so many ways. Now, this is the author's point of view, which I'm trying to tell you in clearer words. So B is going to be the right answer. He disapproves of the fact. So this was a line-specific question. Number 6. Which best summarizes the idea of uniquely unique? Line 42. Once again, this is a target question, a line-specific question. And since we have read these lines again and again, so we are just going to read out the options and we'll pick up the correct answer. Because by now, I'm sure everyone has an idea of what that part of the passage is trying to tell us. We are unique in the same way that all other species are unique. We are defined by attributes that we alone possess and that are qualitatively different from those of other species. We are, by virtue of our elevated rank, insulated from many of the problems of survival faced by less sophisticated species. D, our awareness of our uniqueness defines us as a rational species. E, our apparently unique status is an unintended byproduct of classification systems. Now, I feel that A option could not be the correct answer. It's not like the author is trying to tell by uniquely unique that all other species are unique and we are unique in the same way. We are defined by attributes that we alone possess and that are qualitatively different from those of other species. Seems like the correct answer because he's talking about attributes such as language, so it might be a possible correct answer. Then C, we are, by virtue of our elevated rank, insulated from many of the problems of survival faced by less sophisticated species. Now, this could have been, the first part seems to be correct, but if you read the rest of the statement, it says problems of survival faced by less sophisticated species. This is not mentioned in that particular paragraph, so we would say option C is not possible. Then D, our awareness of our uniqueness defines us as a rational species. Once again, this does not seem to be the right answer because obviously we do not have that kind of awareness, and we are trying to be unique just because we want to take advantage of our rationality, but our awareness tends to be somewhere it's not making an impact on our belief. We are not looking at the characteristics that plants and animals have. So this is definitely not the right answer. E, our apparently unique status is an unintended byproduct of classification systems. Well, we can say this could be the right answer, but the correct answer is going to be option B because we are defined by attributes that we alone possess and that are qualitatively different from those of other species. If you go back and read the paragraph that's there over here, here. The rest of the paragraph talks about the attribute of language, the vehicle dance, and this is the making of tools. So these are attributes, and the evidence that the passage has makes us match it with option B. The examples that follow in that paragraph, they tell us that option B is the correct answer. So E does not make sense because our apparently unique status is an unintended byproduct of classification systems. Not really. We also believe not just in the classification systems, but in our attributes that we have, that we alone possess. So yes. Number 7. In line 44, insulated from means. Now, this is once again a line-specific question. You have to find out the meaning of the word that is used in the context of the passage. So let's read the options. Warmed by, covered with, barred from, segregated from, protected from. So when I read this sentence, insulated from, I'm sure most of you would have understood the answer all by yourself. The answer that makes sense over here is segregated from, because it tends to explain that human beings, they insulate themselves from other species. They are segregated from other species. So they are separated. They tend to stand out. So this is why this is the most appropriate choice. The rest of them, covered, barred, warned, protected, they do not make sense according to that line. Number 8, in the third paragraph, the author criticizes those who believe that. Once again, this is a tone-based question. So let's look for adjectives. And also this is we can say this is a target question because obviously it's talking about the third paragraph. Let's read the options and then we'll move on to the Q&A part of the session. So let's read the options for the last question. The similarities between Homo sapiens and other species are more significant than their differences. Okay. B, the differences between Homo sapiens and other animals are those of degree, not kind. Homo sapiens and animals belong to separate and distinct divisions of the living world. Homo sapiens and animals have the ability to control their environment. Homo sapiens and other organisms can be arranged in Aristotelian nested groups. Last option does not have any evidence in the passage. Homo sapiens and animals have the ability to control their environment. No, this does not have any evidence in the passage either. Homo sapiens and animals belong to separate and distinct divisions of the living world. Okay. This also does not seem to be the right answer. The right answer for this is this is going to be the right answer. B is not going to be the right answer. Why? Let's find out evidence. The differences between Homo sapiens and other animals are those of degree, not kind. Once again, there is no evidence in that particular paragraph because it tends to talk about more about their characteristics, language, the characteristics of the bees. So this can't be the correct answer. So Homo sapiens and animals belong to separate and distinct divisions of the living world. They are absolutely different. And there is evidence in this particular paragraph where they have compared the bees with the humans and in general given their comparison of how they make tools, how they use them. So that's about it. We have just finished a passage and practiced its questions. Now we are going to be having the question and answer session. My colleague Zainab is just going to join us and she's going to share the questions that the participants, the audience has, shared with us. So let's look at them.
Okay.
So hi, Zainab.
Hello. Hi, Mabra. So the first question comes from Rafia. She wants us to repeat tip number 2.
Tip number 2. All right. So I'm going to go back to tip number 2 and I'm going to explain it a bit. Let's take a look at tip number 2. Okay. Treat title questions as main idea questions. So Rafia, title questions as main idea questions, I would like to go and read out the title question for you as well. What exactly is a title question? Now, title question refers to something that is the central idea of the passage, the idea as a whole, I would say, that is given in the passage, right? So usually we look at the overall message in the passage, what the author believes in, what is he trying to state in the passage. So these are title questions. They are usually from, from the entire passage, not from any specific part of the passage, and that is why their statements are also written like this. The primary purpose of the passage is to, and then we have some further examples of these main idea questions. Which of the following most accurately states the main idea of the passage, and the rest you can also read. So these kind of questions, they talk about the whole, the passage as a whole, not just a particular part of the passage. So the overall theme, message given in the passage. I hope that answers your question. Yes.
Great. So the next question comes from Danish. He's asking for some suggestions on the best Gmat books and online preparation sources.
Okay, so the good news is that in the next classes, I am going to share the names of some books that you could perhaps, get your hands on and you could practice those. So yes, I'm going to be sharing some links and resources with you as well, just to make sure that you could practice from there and, you can have an idea as to how you can go about the questions, time yourself and, practice in test-like conditions. So we'll be doing that in the sessions that take place later.
All right. The next question comes from Malik Soban. He asks, what should I do if I can't understand the author's tone and I'm confused among the two most matching answers?
Okay, so this was from Daniel, right?
Soban.
Subhan. So, Subhan, my suggestion for you is that for the first part of your question is that how do we identify the tone of the author if we are not, able to understand it at all, keeping in mind that we have limited time and we have to read the passage, we have to understand it, decipher the meaning that is there in the passage. So, my suggestion would be that when you're reading a passage, there are parts of the passage that you clearly understand. Highlight those. There are parts of the passage that you do not understand. Read those out. Of course, you're going to read the entire passage, but focus on the parts that you understand mostly. And then, read out those parts together. Sometimes that makes sense. And when we talk about what is the tone of the author, look at those particular statements where the author is trying to make a point, where he has used these, I would say, words that he, used for to emphasize on something like, this is because I believe in, this is because this is the observation that I hold. Usually the author would not use words like I or me or myself, not the first person narrative. However, the author always has something in the passage that he wants the reader to believe in. Try to read the entire passage, and whatever opinion you form after reading the passage, that is sometimes the opinion of the author. So if there is a particular phenomenon which the author is trying to, direct you, so please try to consider that as the tone of the author, because the author would want you to believe in something and would want you to divert away from something, not to believe in something. So sometimes the best way is to, focus on the parts that you understand, focus on those sentences. It is generally believed, usually this does not happen, or words, transition words like this is because, furthermore, in addition, these words, they help us understand the tone. So focus on these little details, and I'm sure you will get the point. And you must have read the passage today, and you would have realized that although it was a difficult passage, but we came across little details that told us that how the author has set up his tone. He was being sarcastic, he was being agitated, and he ridiculed what the general beliefs are. So that is the first thing. And what was the second part of the question?
You pretty much answered it. That he was mainly confused about how to select between such confusing choices.
Right.
Now, Afshin asks, do you have any tips for doing the highlighting and underlining part in computer-based tests?
I would say that yes. So for this, we usually have whiteboard tools that are available for online tests as well. So you can make use of them. You can even practice on them prior to your test. So we have these tools for scratch work where we could, note down our details. So this is something that, gives an advantage to the students where they could take down the details, make their points. So I hope that answers your question, that you will be given a whiteboard tool along with the GMAT test, even if it's, you're taking it from home or you're taking it at the test center.
Great. So the last question comes from Hamza. He asks, does the experimental section in the GRE affect the adaptive section algorithm and eventually give me two difficult questions?
Like I said, the experimental section, you would never know which was the experimental section, right? Which was the section that was just given to you to, maybe challenge you. It would never be revealed to the student which section is going to be ungraded. So when you do not have that information, of course, you will just do the test in your own way, the way you have prepared for it, and you will just go with the flow. That is what happens usually when you're on the day of the test. This is what happens with the students. So it would only affect your performance if you stress out because of the time constraints. However, if you're just doing it, like I said, go with the flow. So if you keep that thing in mind, that practice in mind, you would just do your test, right? So it won't affect anything else that you're doing. In fact, it might give you an edge to score better, because sometimes a section that you're not able to do well, it's ungraded. So it gives you an advantage at times. It's just about the time constraints, I guess. Nothing, none of the parts of the GRE test affects another part. It's just an overall thing that you have to manage. So yeah.
Okay, just one new question that's popped up. Afshin wants to know, do you get creative passages as well, like stories, or will there always be an argument?
Usually there are authentic texts most of the times. Texts that are based on fiction might not be there, but yes, passages based on literature might be there. So yes, like I've said, the passages could be based on these subject areas: biological science, humanities, history, literature. So yes, we never know what kind of a passage could we expect in the test.
Okay, let's just take the last question here. Imad asks, how do you develop your sense of critical reasoning in a passage? Any tips?
Okay, so critical reasoning, I would really want to make it a point over here that because you are entering the phase of your life where you have to practice decision making. So when it comes to critical thinking, you have to look at the do's and don'ts. You have to look at the choices and make the best possible choice out of it. So critical thinking is something that relates to that. So the tips that I would suggest you is to practice. For GMAT GRE, the best way to go about the entire verbal section is to practice as much as you can. There is no, shortcut or anything that I would recommend you to practice or to improve your critical thinking skills. You have to put yourself in that situation where you have a kind of a question, where you have to decide, where you have to decipher the meaning to unlock that to that yourself to that level where you're able to look for the meaning, the hidden meaning, read between the lines. So that kind of thing ultimately develops in you the more you practice, the more variety of passages you read. So I would say practice, and that's the key to developing your critical thinking skills.
Wonderful. Thank you for answering these, Mavra.
Thank you so much. Thank you.